Coronavirus. What is it? Where is it? And what do you need to know? Tonight we're answering your questions on health, travel, money and how it might affect your daily life.
Who's most at risk? How do you protect yourself? I'm the BBC's medical correspondent and will be giving you the facts and cutting through the confusion.
Six weeks ago, most of us had never heard of coronavirus. The first cases were reported in Wuhan in China in December. Today, it's in more than 65 countries. That includes Japan, the US, Italy, Spain, and here in the UK. Right now, there are almost 90,000 cases around the world, and more than 3,000 people have died. Now, that sounds like a lot, but remember, the world's population is 7.7 billion. Here in the UK, we've just recorded our 39th case, but the only British person to have died is in Japan. Now, this coronavirus causes an infectious disease called COVID-19. The most common symptoms: fever, tiredness and a dry cough. For most, the symptoms are mild, but around 1 in 6 will become seriously ill. And current estimates from the World Health Organization suggest between 1% and 2% of people who've got it have died. Much more detail on all of this with our experts shortly. And please do send us your questions on social media using the hashtag BBC Your Questions. This is your programme and your chance to get the answers you want. But for now, let's have a look at the story of coronavirus so far. Early December, and doctors in China start to share messages about a new virus. They inform the authorities, but for weeks nothing is done. It takes until New Year's Eve for China to tell the World Health Organization they've had a case of pneumonia of unknown cause. This is the source of the outbreak, a meat and fish market in Wuhan. It's shut on January the 1st. On the 9th of January, China reports its first death. On the 20th, Wuhan, a city bigger than London, is locked down. It becomes a ghost town.
All these shops are closed. There's pretty much nobody on the street here.
British expats trapped in Wuhan are flown home to be put in quarantine. As the number of deaths continues to rise, China builds a new 1,000-bed hospital in just over a week. The worry for health experts that the virus will spread beyond China is about to be realised.
The World Health Organization declares a global health emergency as China's coronavirus spreads.
In Japan, 600 passengers on a cruise ship are quarantined.
We are both positive. We're going to a hostel because there isn't a hospital bed anywhere around.
In Iran, the Deputy Health Minister appeared in public suffering symptoms of the virus. In South Korea, there are now more than 4,000 cases.
This is not Wuhan, but Brighton.
Here in the UK, the number of cases is small, but on the rise. The government says it has plans in place to contain the virus. But the future of this outbreak is uncertain as it continues to spread around the world. Well, keep your questions coming in. We're going to do our best to answer as many as we can. Tonight, we are live on the NHS frontline as the UK tries to contain the virus, and we'll hear from the Prime Minister. Now, if you're confused about what you need to do to protect yourself, if you're going on holiday, if you're worried about taking time off work, or even the prices you might be paying in the shops, we're going to do our best to help. First of all, let's talk to our medical correspondent, Fergus Walsh. So much information swirling around, Fergus. But first of all, how worried should we be?
Well, this is a brand new disease threat. It's only been around about 3 months since it made the jump from animals to humans. And there's a huge amount we don't know about this novel coronavirus. And that level of uncertainty is what's causing such a lot of anxiety. Now, if we get a big outbreak, and it's an if here, then it would place a lot of pressure on the NHS, particularly on intensive care beds. Routine operations would have to be cancelled. But it's important we keep a sense of perspective. Seasonal flu, which comes around every year, causes 500,000 deaths every year around the world. So far, we've had 3,000 from coronavirus.
So that's the important context. Loads of questions coming in. So let's just take a look at some of those that you've been asking us.
I'm Danny Barber from Manchester. My question is, do the face masks actually work?
I'm most worried about the elderly and children. Who's most at risk?
What will happen if I catch a coronavirus?
We've been told to wash our hands, but what else can we do to protect ourselves?
So that gives you an idea of the kinds of things people want to be answered. Let's start with that last one first, perhaps. How can we protect ourselves?
OK, number one is hand hygiene. Good old soap and water. And it's not just a quick dangle under the tap. You've got to get a good lather going. Think about singing 2 verses of Happy Birthdays. Loads of guides online to how you should wash your hands. If you're not near soap and water, then you could use some hand sanitizer. But the key here is got to be alcohol-based in order to kill the coronavirus. Other thing is, don't, when you're out and about, touch we all do it, your face, nose and eyes, because you can pick up the virus from surfaces and infect yourself that way.
So it's getting out of those kind of habits, coughing into tissues, that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
What about face masks? We heard from Danny, the barber there. You have one here. How effective are they?
OK, these little paper face masks aren't really much good. They may give a false sense of security. Leave them, I would suggest, to the medical staff because they need to be changed frequently. They are quite good at preventing someone with an infection from passing it on. That's traditionally how they've been used. But those people really now should be staying at home.
And that question of who's at risk, are some people more vulnerable than others?
Well, anyone can catch it. The good news is young children are really pretty much in the clear on this virus. In fact, so far, of the reported cases, only 2 out of 100 have been in people under 20 years of age. Most at risk are the elderly. The older you are, the greater your risk. And those with underlying health problems, things like heart disease, respiratory disease and diabetes. But this is an indiscriminate virus. It can kill young people as well. One of the first to die was a doctor in China who first raised the alarm about it, and he was 34.
A question from Peter on Twitter right now. How long does the virus live on surfaces such as mail, food and packaging? And what's the risk from things like that?
OK, there's very little evidence that there's any risk from getting post from Italy or China where the virus could last there. It can survive on hard surfaces for quite a few hours.
Deborah's also got in touch. She's on Twitter. She says, is it possible to be a carrier of the virus, but to not actually display the symptoms?
Yes, it is. These carriers, and there's quite a lot of reported cases here, they can be potentially shedding the virus and potentially infecting other people. But those who are giving off the most virus are the most sick because, they're coughing and sneezing. And that's why healthcare workers are at particular risk.
Fergus, for the time being, thank you very much. We'll be back a little bit later on. So if you have a question for Fergus or us here on the team, you can send it via social media using the hashtag BBC Your Questions. Now, let's talk about the big picture here. What is the government and the NHS doing to protect us at the moment? Well, the official advice is if you think you have symptoms, don't go to your doctor or the hospital, but call NHS 111. And right now, that's where we can join our global health correspondent, Tulip Mazumdar. And Tulip, we've heard that they're experiencing many more calls to 111 there at the moment. How are they coping?
Well, they certainly are, and really welcome to what is one of the most important parts of the UK's response to this outbreak. These call centre workers, which include call handlers, doctors, nurses, are dealing with around 1,000 calls every single weekday. And actually, in call centres like this around the country, they've seen a rise of around a quarter of call volume coming in, and that number is only expected to rise as new cases, or the UK braces itself for new cases. Well, we can speak to one of the call handlers here at the moment. If I could just disturb you for a moment, Yasmin Field. Just talk us through what are the key things people are asking about when they call.
Well, a lot of people don't know what to expect. They don't know what's involved with the coronavirus. They're worried about what to do, about the self-isolation, where to go. What do they do next? How is it treated?
And what do you tell them?
Reassurance more than anything. Obviously, we put them in the direction of PHE, the Public Health of England, as well. Just to reassure them and advise them the best we can of where to go and what to do.
Okay, Yasmin, Phil, thank you so much. I'll let you get on. Well, look, as you can see, it's an extremely busy Monday night here because there are so many calls coming in. People across the country are being urged to get in touch with that online NHS 111 service rather than calling in the first instance. It's already had around 70,000 inquiries online. Half of those came in just one day over the weekend. Well, answering some of these calls as well is Jag Singh, who is a pharmacist. What are you telling people who call up and you hear where they've been, what they've been doing, and you think, OK, this person may well have coronavirus?
Well, if we suspect that a patient has been infected with coronavirus, we're asking them to self-isolate for 14 days and really limit the amount of contact they have with others. That also means, for example, having deliveries of groceries and medicines to the house rather than venturing out.
And it's a really anxious time, isn't it, for people who are having to self-isolate? I mean, what are you telling them to try and reassure them?
Well, I believe patients always feel better when they know that they're doing the right thing. So the best thing that we can do to reassure patients here at NHS 111 is to provide the most relevant and up-to-date information.
OK, Jag Singh, thank you very much. Well, also here is the man in charge of this operation. It's Anthony Marsh, and he's also in the process of recruiting 150 more call handlers because of the volume of calls coming in. Now, you are facing an unprecedented number of calls at the moment, but some people have been being on hold for a long time, and some people just have put the phone down before anyone answers. I mean, are you able to cope with this influx?
Absolutely. Our staff are dealing with record numbers of calls to NHS 111, doing a fantastic job in this call centre and 111 call centres right across our country, doing an absolutely fantastic job for which I am personally very, very grateful. But we are dealing with more calls. It would be really helpful if members of the public that require up-to-date information would be able to go online and get that current information by going to 111.nhs.uk, where you'll receive the latest information, because obviously we are dealing with an evolving situation and the guidance is regularly being updated. So members of the public could really help us by going online, thus leaving the call handlers, the nurses, paramedics and doctors in our call centres to be able to help those patients that really do need to speak to a clinician in the call centre.
And you are dealing as well with a lot of misinformation. There's lots of rumours and fear-mongering to some extent going around. I mean, how are you handling that?
And that's exactly why it's so important that members of the public that want that up-to-date latest information, please go online, 111.nhs.uk. You'll receive the very latest information and the help that you need.
OK, thank you very much for that, Anthony Marsh. Well, this call centre, along with dozens like it all across the country, are working 24/7 to answer people's calls. Again, it's been said a number of times, make sure that in the first instance, if you are worried, you go online, you go to that NHS 111 online service. I did it and managed to get some really useful information in probably less than a minute. But the key thing all of us should be doing right now to protect ourselves and our families is what you've been hearing from Fergus there, and you'll hear it throughout this programme. Keep washing your hands.
Thank you very much, Tulip. A busy evening in Dudley there. And you've heard there about what the NHS is doing to stop the virus spreading here in the UK. But what about the government's role in tackling coronavirus? Well, our political editor, Laura Kunsberg, has been asking the Prime Minister whether he and his ministers are preparing for a widespread outbreak.
You've got to consider the realistic possibility that there is now going to be a significant expansion in the number of cases. And so, you know, we will be setting out tomorrow the steps that we are going to take as a country, as a government, working together to inform the public about what we're doing and setting out the method by which we'll be taking those decisions.
Are we looking already at closing lots of schools, cancelling big events, And, you know, the public have seen other parts of the world basically in lockdown because of what's been going on. Is that what people should expect?
What we've got is a range of calibrated responses to the spread of coronavirus, and clearly the measures that you have mentioned are on that list. And the issue will be when and how and with what logic to deploy them. And we will be as transparent as we possibly can. But at the moment, I just wish to repeat the crucial thing we can all do to help the NHS to stop the spread of the disease is wash your hands twice, 2 verses of Happy Birthday, hot water and soap. But apart from that, Laura, at the moment, I should stress that it should be business as usual.
What would be the trigger, though, for that kind of widespread action of closing public buildings? You've just said you want to be transparent. What would be the trigger for that?
I think you look at what we're going to be saying tomorrow about the timings and about the various considerations and the menu of options that we have.
Will you make extra resources for the NHS available if they ask for them? Because there's already some anecdotal evidence. It's taking a long time for people to get through to 111 on the NHS. Yeah. There's some evidence people aren't being able to get tested as quickly as they would like to. Will you commit today to give the NHS exactly what it asks for, even if that runs into significant extra amounts of money?
Of course, we will do everything we can to address the problem and to stop the spread of the disease. And we are also, as you know, we're putting record cash investment now into the NHS. The NHS is a fantastic organisation, fantastic health system, and they are very well prepared.
Will you give them everything they ask for?
Of course, of course.
And are you worried about the effect on the economy, though? Because if we are looking at very significant disruption here, there will be an economic impact, won't there?
Well, be in no doubt that something like a mass epidemic is going to have all sorts of consequences, and there is always the potential for an economic downside as well, and you're seeing that around the world, and we are ready for that. But don't forget the fundamentals of the UK economy are very strong, and I do not wish in any way to minimise the significance and the importance of the challenge that this country will face, I think, almost inevitably in the course of the next few weeks, months. I do not wish to minimise that. But what I do wish to reassure the public about is, number one, that we've taken every possible precaution and preparation that we can. And secondly, I have absolutely no doubt that this country will not be defeated by coronavirus, and that we will come through it very well in the end.
Prime Minister talking a short while ago. So many questions coming in. Thank you for sending those in. Anything at all that you want to pick up from that interview or anything else you want to ask, use the hashtag BBC Your Questions. But right now, let's talk about some other ways that coronavirus is already affecting the way you live. We'll discuss all things money and prices in a moment with Nina. But first, let's talk travel. John Kay is at a travel agent in Somerset right now. John, and lots of people want to know, how is this going to affect my holiday?
Yeah, Rachel, we've heard this evening that British Airways and Ryanair are among the airlines who've announced tonight that they are cancelling some flights over the next few weeks. Clearly, the travel industry is already being hit by this. But lots of your questions coming in tonight, like these people here, wondering, how does this affect your Easter holidays, maybe your summer holiday plans? Should you cancel? Should you go? What happens if you do? These two gentlemen should be able to help us. Miles Morgan, this is your travel agent. Thanks for having us here this evening.
No problem.
Simon Calder, Independent's travel editor. Should we start with you? What is the official British government advice as things stand right now?
For coronavirus, the only areas which are off limits are mainland China, that came in about 3 weeks ago, and 2 regions of South Korea and 11 towns in northern Italy. And they're, by the way, not places that any tourists would normally find themselves in. Everywhere else, according to the Foreign Office, the risks are tolerably low, although I know from unprecedented numbers of people getting in touch with me, there's huge amounts of stress and anxiety out there, people whose anticipation of their holidays just turned into apprehension, I'm afraid.
Mars, here at the sharp end then, what are you seeing, that apprehension and anxiety?
Yeah, I think it's no surprise, our shops have been inundated with people coming in asking questions, and it's quite comforting they can sit down in a travel agency, talk through what the options are. And I'm pleased to say the vast majority, over 99% of people, are just carrying on as normal with their holiday, which is absolutely right.
But when they come in and they want reassurance, how can you reassure them if they've seen hotels locked down and cruise ships locked down, that kind of thing?
It's a perspective. It's a matter of looking just how many people are affected, the areas affected, and in the scheme of the world, it's still very, very small numbers of people and areas.
Simon, what is somebody's options then? If somebody's thinking, I don't want to go, I just don't fancy it anymore, I'm thinking about cancelling, what can you do? What should you do?
You've got very few options. If you happen to be booked on one of the hundreds of flights cancelled by British Airways, Ryanair and EasyJet, then you can opt to get your money back. If you pay separately for accommodation or car rental, you won't necessarily get that back. You might be able to claim it from insurance, but that's very unlikely. The vast majority, though, of people who are booked to travel, if they decide not to go, they will lose some or all of their money. They won't be able to get it through travel insurance. And I must say, I know how upset people are, but genuinely, there's never been a safer era for British travellers to be going abroad. And I've seen some really irrational decisions made. I'm travelling a lot. Friday night, Stansted, talking to a lady in the security queue, keeping a respectable distance so that to minimise any risk. She's off to Cyprus. Her partner has decided not to go, so she's waking up on this wonderful island, no coronavirus, sun, healthy, lovely. He's waking up in rainy old Essex with, I'm afraid, no holiday and sadly today a case of coronavirus.
OK, well, look, thank you both for your reassuring words and your information. We're not going to go to Essex, but we can go somewhere else because we can talk about the effect on the wider economy, not just the world economy, the UK economy, and we can go to Amersham because that's where Nina is in a warehouse. Nina.
I am indeed. Good evening, John. China is often referred to as the warehouse of the world. Just have a little look around the room that you're sitting in. You can almost guarantee that something there was made, or at least part made in China. What happens there matters to warehouses like this one in particular, which stocks and supplies toys, up to 80% of which in some way have come through China. Let's have a chat to Gary. So far, what has the impact been on your supply chain?
At the moment, we're receiving most of the orders from the UK and Europe that we're placing. But the supply chain disruption that we're experiencing are our containers leaving late from the Far East. The factories have been closed for an extended new year, and most of the stock would have expected to have been dispatched late February is now not being dispatched. OK,
so in the months ahead, what sorts of products are you worried about, especially in the run-up to Christmas?
What I would expect to start seeing some of the ranges being depleted from about mid to late April. And that would include popular brands like Barbie, which is selling well, Paw Patrol, Nerf blasters. These items all come from the Far East. OK, so it's very much a delayed reaction on that, isn't it? And it's not just the Far East, is it, that you're worried about? No, we've been advised today that a lot of our footballs that come from Italy are now being caught up in the coronavirus that's taking place in Italy. So it's not just a Chinese problem now.
Okay, and Gary's been stockpiling some products, but as he said, it's very unpredictable to know what's going to happen next. Thank you so much for all of your questions that have been coming in. Let's put some of them to Linda, who's an economist. People are wanting to know, is it too soon to quantify the true extent of this?
It's still very soon, but an influential think tank, the OECD, today said the coronavirus could tip the global economy into recession. Now, that's going to be very worrying for us. We trade a lot with the rest of the world, and you might remember at the end of last year, the economy was stagnant. So it may mean growth is not as good this year as was originally forecast before the coronavirus.
We heard from the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, earlier, who said that we do have a robust economy. What can governments do to intervene?
Well, the Bank of England could ease credit conditions, help firms a bit with cash flow. The government has a budget coming up on March the 11th. They could look at tax measures to help factories. They could help retailers, maybe look at business rates, looking at VAT. So there's a range of things that can be done to help businesses, help consumers weather this shock.
And on Twitter, some consumers have been asking us, should I start stockpiling now? And if I should, what should I be filling the cupboards with?
Yeah. Well, at the moment, the coronavirus is affecting things which are mostly produced in Asia, things like toys and computers. But as you've just mentioned, it's actually spreading everywhere. So it could be that tea and fresh foods and car parts from Europe, Africa could start to be affected. But what I would stress is there are local producers for these things. So it may just be you have a little bit less choice in the future. But of course, if you need something, it's an absolute necessity, then just keep watching and following developments closely.
OK, but do not panic just yet. Thank you to Jim, thank you to Mike, to Sue and to Kay, who all got in touch to ask about your rights if you self-isolate. If you are fully employed, the advice from government is it's treated exactly the same as sick leave. But if you are self-employed, if you're on 0 hours contract, that's very much at the discretion of your employer. Just a thought to finish on the markets when they opened this morning, recovered to the tune of nearly 3% after a terrible week last week, the worst in over a decade. This is very much, when it comes to business and economics, a situation that's changing day by day. Rachel.
Thank you very much, Nina and John, giving us an idea of just how far this virus can reach. Now, we're hoping to get through plenty more of your questions now. With us once again, Fergus Walsh, the BBC's medical correspondent, and alongside him, Professor Sian Griffiths, who is Emeritus Professor of Public Health. Thank you very much for your time. Now, we're going to start with a question from Tom. He wants to know what self-isolating actually means. And specifically, he says, can we share a bathroom, a kitchen and the bedroom? Can I dress the children? Can I talk to them? Help, he says. Fergus.
Self-isolation, the cue's in the title. You've got to self-isolate. So if you've got kids running around and you've got to look after them, they've got to stay at home with you. But they may be very pleased to stay at home off school while you're waiting for your test result.
Let's hear a couple more questions then that have been sent in to us.
Hi, I'm Sophie, I'm from Manchester. How can we protect our children from coronavirus and will schools be closing?
I'm Chase, I'm from the United States, and I'm wondering if someone is working on a cure for the coronavirus, and if so, how long it'll take to get to us.
Well, Fergus, let's talk about children first of all. Are they particularly vulnerable? Should we be closing schools?
They don't seem to be particularly vulnerable, but children are very good at spreading germs about, and school closures are always the first thing that public health officials turn to because they tend to bring the bugs home with them and then give them to more vulnerable people.
So watch the children in that case. And what about that question about a cure? And perhaps we also want to talk about a vaccine. What treatment, Sian, is there and how close are we to a vaccine?
This is a very new disease. And so at the moment, there are many groups of scientists working on both the production of a vaccine and on which antivirals might be the most effective. In terms of the vaccine, that takes time. So it won't be for about a year, and that'll be pretty quick if it comes then. So we mustn't rely on a vaccine. In terms of the use of antiviral drugs, they have been used in other viral diseases and work is ongoing at the current time. But again, any new development takes time.
And in fact, in some cases, people will get better without any medical treatment
at all. Well, 80% of people get better without that sort of treatment.
Which is important to point out. Question from Paul. He says, why have we not set up checkpoints at airports to test for the virus? In some countries, you see those thermal imaging cameras.
Well, those thermal imaging cameras aren't necessarily the answer because a recent study found they were about 10% effective in detecting a fever. And the other important factor is that you will have probably been tested at port of exit. You won't have a temperature as you come into the country. So it's much more effective to have the system that we have, which is flights from high-risk areas are met and people are given information about 111 and self-isolation.
And a question here on social distancing from Claire on Twitter. She asks, should I be wearing gloves when I go out or I'm around other people?
Well, gloves might help unless you then suddenly touch your face. You'll be passing on maybe a whole load of germs that way. Really, social distancing, we maybe ought to start thinking about not shaking hands anymore. The French have advised the French citizens not to kiss on the cheek. So maybe we should all be careful about who we kiss.
And my friend from China said to do this rather than anything. The elbow bump.
Yeah. New ways of social interaction.
Absolutely.
In that case.
Yes, don't do it too hard.
We've had so many questions in, so let's try and fly through a few more. Lots of people are asking about whether you're more susceptible if you have asthma or HIV. What do we know about that and people with suppressed immune systems?
OK, so suppressed immune systems, definitely. Asthma, yes. No knowledge of whether people with HIV are at any greater risk.
And Sian, this is from Sai on Twitter. He says, how do I tell the difference between a common cold and coronavirus?
through the test, probably, unless your symptoms go on to develop into chest disease, and then you're more likely to have coronavirus.
But a sniffle isn't normally associated with coronavirus. Are the symptoms a little bit more specific?
The symptoms tend to be fever, shortness of breath, and a cough. And a cold will probably have a runnier nose than that.
Okay.
But it's not foolproof, and that's why the tests are being done. There's a whole lot of testing being done through GPs and hospitals at the moment by Public Health England to see if we're missing any cases.
And just a final thought from both of you, how bad is this going to get?
Well, I've not reported on anything in a long career, Ebola, SARS, bird flu, swine flu, which has the same potential as the new coronavirus, but it's to cause havoc to the economy and problems in the NHS and to healthcare, but it's potential. And just think, TB, another infectious disease, kills more people every day than the coronavirus has killed so far.
Sian and Fergus, thank you very much for your time. That's all we've got time for. But the good news is, if you missed any of this, it will be on the iPlayer. You can also find it on BBC Sounds if you want to hear it again. And there's lots more advice and explanation if you want to go to bbc.co.uk/coronavirus. And there's also a live Q&A with Fergus Walsh and Professor Sian Griffiths on the BBC News Facebook page coming up. They'll be answering your questions also on Instagram. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks for your time. Goodbye.